Greetings and welcome. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the fastest way to create and publish your podcast. It's free. That's right. It's free to download with built-in tools that allow you to record, edit, and formulate your podcast the way you want from your cell phone or any smart device. Anchor also distributes your podcast on virtually any platform that streams podcasts like Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Apple and Google Podcasts, and much, much more. You can even monetize your podcast with no minimum listeners. Anchor is the one-stop shop app for podcasting. So remember, it's free. Go to anchor.fm to create some amazing content. And I want to welcome everybody to the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. I'm your host, your Fire Medic CEO, LP. We have a very special guest in the building today. We are going to be doing a three-part, potentially more, but it's going to be a three-part special. And I'll give you the information as we go along because I'm just so excited right now. I'm going to give you all the disclaimers first, and then I'll introduce our special guest. So, again, you know how we do it. This is the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. We have uncensored conversations, we exchange information, and we provide a ton of resources for all of the listeners. If you are triggered at any point during this podcast, and I mean at any point, and you need immediate help, please call 911. That's where all the help starts. Everything's recorded. Most of these people are mandated reporters, so they can help you with immediate needs. If you don't have an immediate need, then we have a bunch of numbers that are provided in the show notes for every podcast. So if you have issues with domestic violence, if you have issues with sexual assault, trafficking, we have all those phone numbers in the show notes. If you are someone who's dealing with alcohol or drugs or a supporter, we have those numbers. So we have Al Anon for the supporters, we have Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous. And finally, if you are suicidal or need some behavioral help, you have a behavioral health need, I should say, call 988. Again, 988. We provide all that information in the show notes, and it's always available for you 24 hours a day. That being said, I want to introduce my special guest, Dr. Torie Williams. Dr. Torie Williams, you have such a long CV. So I gave it Cliff Notes version before we start. So I'm going to
Okay.
read that. We're just going to jump into it. So Dr.
Okay.
Torie Williams was born and raised in Casey, Missouri, my home state, Missouri. You know, she has earned a Bachelor's of Science in Psychology from the University of Central Missouri in Warrensburg, Missouri. Worked as an educational consultant with the Chicago Public Schools and has continued independently, adding her mentorship initiative since then. Dr. Williams also completed a Master of Arts in Teaching, or MAT for short, with an emphasis in special education from National Louis University in the Chi, and worked as a teacher in various schools. In addition to her MAT, she earned a master's in business administration as well. Dr. Williams was a special education teacher and the director of student activities, where she not only taught classes, which included social, emotional learning. She was responsible for 52 different extracurricular activities, which is important. And we're going to talk about that as we do these different segments, ranging from band to National Honor Society. Her biggest achievement was her receiving and earning her doctorate in education from Chicago State University in December of 2019. Dr. Williams is an educational consultant, a behavior intervention specialist, a mentor, a coach, a motivational speaker, and advisor to hundreds of students in various capacities. She also is the special education admission, review, and dismissal administrator of Forney ISD in Forney, Texas. Dr. Williams encourages involvement in extracurricular activities. Her motivation has always been her three beautiful children, Kamari, Kennedy, and Corey. I got those right, Dr.
You did.
C, who are actively involved in various activities inside and outside of school. And Dr. Torie has this educational program called Be Victorious, play on her word, on her name, which
Mm-hmm.
is an educational program that encourages the professional development of the individual and provides actionable guidance by offering a fresh perspective and an independent point of view while guiding a process about that.
That's me.
So I could go on and I can go on and I
That's
can
me.
go on, but I'm not, because I'm going to provide the links, and I got it on the screen here. I got your link tree. I got your IG. I got your awesome photo with your Beef Victoria shirt. I need to get a shirt, Dr. Williams. So
I got it. I'm working on it. This is what I'm doing. I promise. I'm working
just
on
tell
it.
me where I got to send my Cash App or my PayPal or whatever, and
I
I'm
got you.
there. I want you to give us a little bit more information about you, because we're going to talk about your life,
Okay.
and we're going to talk about how it relates to, for those that are watching, because we are streaming on all platforms. This video will be available everywhere. You will only be able to watch it on Spotify and our YouTube channel, which is the company name, Penton Pending Consulting Solutions LLC. We put out a
Okay.
podcast every Thursday, typically about 12:01 a.m. And so I don't have the specific date of this particular one yet, but it's probably going to be real soon. And so, with no further ado, Dr. Torie Williams, PhD. How are you, my friend?
It's my pleasure. It is. It's my pleasure to be here. I call it thanks living.
Thanks, living. I
That's
love
what
it.
I'm doing. Absolutely.
You
So,
know,
so
Dr. Williams,
yes,
when we when we talked before, I just we have such we have a lot of things in common,
we
not
do.
just because we're both from the Midwest and we're both from Missouri. There's so many things that we talked about yesterday that it's just amazing that we haven't run into each other before.
That's
But
true.
you know what? Here's what I want to ask you for starters.
Hmm.
As an educator and as a melanated professional,
Okay.
I know you said your greatest, biggest achievement was receiving your doctorate in education. And
Hmm.
my flowers and hats off and salute to you for doing that, because
Thank
that's
you so
mine.
much.
What else would you say would be second to that?
I have to make that first because there's a story behind that. I'm actually the first person from my family to graduate from high school. So it was a the first to graduate from high school was a big deal on both
Yeah,
sides of my family, on my mom's side and my dad's side, the first to graduate from high school. So it was a big deal. I set the tone not only for my family members, but my community, because if you know anything about Kansas City, even going and graduating from high school is a big deal. So
oh yeah,
I set that trend. And then when I went to college, there was another trend of graduating with my bachelor's in psychology. And that was a big deal. And I knew, I wish I would have known, and this is the reason why I became a mentor. If I would have known that you really can't do anything with the undergrad in psychology, I would have looked into something different. But I
yeah.
became a mentor because I didn't have that. I didn't have that person to say, you know, you can actually get into college undecided. You don't have to do your major. You can just go to college with your GPA and things of that nature and determine your major from there. I didn't know that. And so that's when I immediately became a mentor, because there are people that I knew that were looking up to me, and I knew that I needed to make that difference. So immediately, I'm going to say my senior year in high school, I became a mentor. So
And
becoming a mentor my senior year would be second.
what was your doctoral dissertation on?
Interesting. My topic is addressing adverse childhood experiences and correlating it to extracurricular activity. And I did that based off of the experiences that I experienced as an educator, as a teacher, being in my position. I noticed, if you know anything about the city of Chicago, what you see on TV is what you see. There are deaths. Yes, they will take your car. And but there are so many other positive lights in Chicago as well. So one of the many things I taught in a school in Dalton, Illinois. If you know anything about Chicago, Dalton.
That's my second city.
is Dalton. Um, I taught in Chicago for a long time. So with me started teaching at Chicago Vocational High School, which was one of the biggest schools in Chicago, it just went from there. I knew that I needed to be that voice for our youth. And so when I took that opportunity to become the director of student activities, it just streamlined from there. I put a whole bunch of kids into activities. I mean, name them, I'm not going to lie. The drug dealers, the kids that didn't have parents. School became a safe haven, seriously, for the students. I don't even think half the students even knew that I was a special education teacher, because I'm seriously a special education teacher, educated, certified, everything. But I related to so many students, all the way from the gifted and talented students, all the way to the severe, profound in regards to special education. But even though students in the general education classroom, because I was so relatable as a teacher, students just used to come by, check to see how I was doing, and we would just chat. We would chat about, real world things. They would stay after school. I would encourage them to get involved, and as a result, here I am. It motivated me. I'm not saying that that connection to adverse childhood experiences is to them, so I won't say that, but I will say there were a lot of students that fit those examples of students with adverse childhood experiences. Yes.
I want to jump into your story right away because, you know, we when we talked, I was like, man, I'm going to have to do a 3-part with Dr. Williams. I just going to have to. There's no ands or buts about it. Uh, it wouldn't do you justice to just give you an hour or so and be like, okay, I'm in, and
Yeah.
I know it happens, but I'm just different. So I want to jump into your story because we titled this episode, and this is part of a series. This is
Mm-hmm.
part one,
Mm-hmm.
entitled Domestic Violence, or DV, and
Okay.
ACEs, a
Okay.
personal journey.
Okay.
I want you to rewind the clock back.
Okay.
I want you to talk about, from whatever point you want to start, where this was a problem in your household.
Okay. Well, I will share. I did grow up with two parents, and shout out to my mom and dad. They're amazing. But I didn't have domestic violence in my household. When we think of adverse childhood experiences, I'm more into the household dysfunction.
Sure.
So my parents divorced when I was separated and divorced when I was 14 and 15 years old, and I was in the middle of it. Um, and I had to grow up immediately.
Sure.
When your parents are going through what they're going through, their depression, their anxiety, their situations, they kind of remove you from those, but then they neglect you too, because, you have to have the survival of the fittest. So it was that for me and my brothers. Loved them to death. Um, but the harsh reality is I love my parents to death, and they were 16 and 17 when they got married. My dad, when he was 16, lost his mom. He immediately went straight to the military. So 16 years old, military, he has yet, and I love him to death, to address his PTSD. My mom, her mother abandoned her. And when mom's mother abandoned her, my grandfather was trying to find replacements for mothers. And so my mother had a lot of stepmothers, and she was sexually abused by one of her step siblings.
Okay.
And because we are who we are, we kind of kept it in the family. We didn't have any discussions, but me growing up, I knew something was going on. I just didn't know, because my older brother did take on my father's name, so I knew about that. But it wasn't until you get older and people start putting your personal business out there that I started asking questions, and my mother wouldn't say anything. She wouldn't address it. My dad would say, "Well, go talk to your mom." And it's like, I have questions. So that's when I actually became a researcher. I became a researcher my sophomore year in high school because I had
Wow.
questions. And it was, I need to find out. So I went to other family members on both sides of my family to get the information that I needed since my parents were not as receptive as others. And I found out a lot of information. At that time, at 15 and 16, it wasn't great to hear it all. So I disconnected myself, um, graduated from high school, and left Kansas City. So that's actually the reason why I left. I wanted to go to college, I wanted to do something better with my life. And so I made that decision to disconnect from my entire family. Call it the flight syndrome, the 4 F's of trauma, all of that. Yeah,
We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about those four F's.
I ended up leaving, went to college because I knew that I could do better with my life going to college, and that's exactly what I did.
What age were
Here
you?
it is, years later. Do I forgive my parents? Yes. Do I understand the reason why they couldn't tell me? Yes. I understand all of that. But if it wasn't for research, it wasn't for me, experiencing the things that I experienced in my childhood trauma, in my ACEs, then I would have never been the person that I am now. So while I'm grateful for those opportunities, I am humbled because they shaped me to be the person that I am right now.
And that's why I formulated the question like that, because I want to pose why I asked that question the
Okay.
way I did. Because for me, it is something that we may not experience domestic violence in our immediate household per se, but we have family members that grew up and they experienced it. And we know just from research and just from life experiences that those unresolved traumas that you said your dad had and
Mm-hmm.
what happened with your mom, unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
shaped how they interacted with you and your siblings. They shaped
Right.
how your household was ran. They shaped how they taught you about life and
Mm-hmm.
life issues,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe not taught you about some things. As you said, you started getting questions in your head and you're like, well, I need the answer to these things. So that's why I asked that, because a lot of times people make the assumption. That's why I pose the question to guests that have not experienced it directly. It's more of an indirect thing, because you can tell the audience that, hey, you know what, yeah, I didn't experience it directly, but that doesn't mean it didn't have an effect on me, because my parents had experienced it. My grandma or whoever the caregiver was to you while you were a minor, they experienced these things on some level, and it had a direct effect on your upbringing.
Right.
How old were you when you left KC and went to Chicago to go to college?
Ooh. So I actually went to the University of Central Missouri first. So
Central Missouri, I'm sorry,
I left in 1995, and I
95.
did a wonderful 4 year bout there. Um, Loved it. Loved my college experience. Shout out to
In
um,
the rural Missouri, now you gotta tell us about that. You're
so
in rural
I'll be
Missouri.
honest, I think a lot of my creativity came from being in rural Missouri because we didn't have anything at all but trees
That's right.
or us.
Right.
So a lot of my creativity is stemmed from um, University of Central Missouri because we had to come up with things and get creative all by ourselves. I loved it. I loved it that I was away from my family enough,
Mhm.
farther away to where they
Oh,
couldn't visit as much. Um, the first semester, first year, I actually did bring my nieces and nephews down there so they could see, college and things like that. Brought a bunch of mentees down there because, like I said, it was a big deal.
okay.
So it's a lot of people that followed in my footsteps just by attending University of Central Missouri. So shout out to my family that were attended and still are attending, actually.
Oh, that's awesome.
Hmm.
So you graduate from university, and then you go to Chicago,
Mm, I made a pit stop before I went
and
to.
not a pit stop.
I made a pit stop in Indianapolis, and I liked Indianapolis. Indianapolis was great. I did a 2 year stint in Indianapolis because I was working for an organization called Aramark, That's where my MBA comes in.
Okay.
My first job was working in housekeeping as a supervisor. I got that idea from my dad. Shout out to my dad. My dad is a retired housekeeping supervisor. Like I said, I didn't have the guidance
Sure.
that one would have, which pushed me to be a mentor. But that was my first job, and I let them move me to Indianapolis, where I ran a facility at the Indianapolis hospital.
Okay.
It was great just to have that experience, but I didn't have family or friends there,
Mhm.
and I had a whole bunch of family that stayed in Chicago. And due to an accident, I figured it was close. I needed to be close to my family just in case something happens, and I moved to Chicago. I got accepted into a program to get my master's degree, and went from there.
Tell us about Chicago briefly.
And Chicago made me. I will be totally honest. I'm always going to be loyal. I'm always going to support Chicago because they actually it shaped me to be the woman that I am. Chicago is culture. Chicago is entrepreneurship. Chicago is independency. Chicago is everything. Like it is amazing. It's humbling. I've met the best connections there. Just the culture, like, oh my God. And it's just not Chicago, but shout out to like Hoffman Estates, Naperville,
Yeah,
Evanston,
Chicago land.
how yeah,
The whole Chicago land.
yeah,
Yeah.
all of it is an amazing sight. I've met some wonderful people, and like I said, it has shaped and simplified my character for sure. Love it to death. If I had to pick and choose, I would do exactly what I'm doing now. I would visit over the summer because I love summertime shy. That's what we call it.
Summertime Shine's the best.
Yeah, y'all can keep the winter. They I already got a message. They snowing right now,
Yeah.
so I'm good. Yeah,
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 I almost moved to Chicago a number of times, and I always call it my second city because I'm from
yeah.
St. Louis, and so I would go there all the time, hang out. That was my playground. Like I said, don't like the winter up there, but sometimes Chicago is almost one of the best places in the country that you can be in.
Yeah.
And like you said, it gets such a bad rep
Mhm.
for because of the crime and some of the other things that happen in a bunch of other cities, but it just is such an eyesore on Chicago itself
Mhm.
because it's such a dynamic and fantastic city. And like you said,
It
not just the city, but Chicagoland, all of the suburbs, Schaumburg and
is.
Naperville,
Mhm.
all of these places. I used to love going to Schaumburg because that's where I first went to my first IKEA store.
Mhm. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Stayed out there, and I was like, wait, they got two IKEAs in Chicago.
Mhm.
I was like, oh my
Mhm.
god, So when they built the one in Kansas City, I was like, you're not gonna build one in St. Louis? This is the biggest city in the state. What's going
Yeah.
on? I was like about to write letters, and then they end up building one in
Yeah.
St. Louis a few
In due
years.
time. Yeah.
So I was like, somebody heard my thoughts or whatever.
Uh-huh. And you got your IKEA store.
I
Yeah.
got my IKEA store.
Yes. Yes. So Chicago owes me nothing. I owe Chicago everything.
ACEs.
Mhm.
What made you want to focus on ACEs and special education? Because which came first?
Well, special education came first
Okay.
because I've always been certified in special education.
Okay.
Um, to me, it's cross categorical because you have special education and then you have adverse childhood experiences. And being in special education, you can see it. So I'll give you the example of neglect. It happens all the time, and um, instead of doing right for our students, parents, we opt for special education because we think that that's the option, or we have teachers that can't deal with the emotional issues that come with childhood trauma, ACEs. And so we're quick to refer them to special education when it's not special education that they need. They need support. And I'll be honest, right now in 2022, we just came from a huge break thanks to COVID-19. And I hate to hear when people say, oh, when we were back in COVID-19, people, we're still in COVID-19. It's
That's
still
right.
people that are suffering from COVID-19. The bigwigs decided we want you all to go back to work. We're going
Mhm.
to raise the prices on inflation and make things a little bit higher and
Mhm.
put you all back to work. And here we are. And right now, I am overwhelmed because I sit in meetings where you get parents that are excited about the kids coming to special education, or I see a young man or a woman that was misdiagnosed and is not supposed to be receiving services at all. It's disappointing, but then again, that's why I'm in the position I am in, so I can make sure that I address it.
We don't do the iceberg conversations in this podcast. So I want to give all the listeners the disclaimer again. If you're just joining us, this is the Trigger Warning Talk podcast, sponsored by Anchor, produced by Penton Pending Consulting Solutions LLC, my company. We put out a episode every Thursday morning, streaming on all podcast platforms. 80% of our interviews are available on video, like this one will be. That will be visible on Spotify and our YouTube channel, which is the company name, Pending Consulting Solutions LLC. Dr. Williams,
Mm-hmm.
this is a personal journey of yours,
Mm-hmm.
not just your advocacy and your awareness work when it comes to ACEs,
Mm-hmm.
also special education.
Right.
You just said something that just piqued my interest.
Okay, I'm
You
ready.
said you sit in these meetings
Mm-hmm.
and you're listening to the parents, you're listening to the other educators, you're coming up with this IEP, this individual education plan for this particular student who is maybe on the cusp of being special education qualified or nay.
Right.
You, as the educational professional,
Mm-hmm.
your professional judgment, are you that final? Are you like in the bully pulpit of, okay, like I'm the president, Dr. Williams, you're the president. You got these 12 cabinet members who are these other administrators. They're giving you all this information, including the parent, about their particular child or children, because they may have more than one. And based on all of that data that they give you, are you the person that says yay or nay?
There is a committee. And so that's the reason why it makes so much sense. It's the admissions review and dismissal committee. So I am not the one
ARD, okay.
final because decision. Yeah, the R committee.
The R
I
committee.
am not the one that makes the final decision. I am the one that facilitates the decision. So there's a difference. If I see that something is an issue or a problem when I'm going over my paperwork, I address it immediately. So, say for example, if there's a student that's being transferred in to our district, that paperwork comes to me.
Okay.
And if I notice that that student has been mislabeled or misdiagnosed, I bring that to the R committee and we discuss, review, and make a decision as a committee.
Okay. When it comes to ACEs in
Mm-hmm.
and of itself, as it relates to these children,
Mm-hmm.
I want you to give us a brief breakdown because in part two, we're really going to deep dive into what ACEs is, misconceptions,
Mm-hmm.
everything that you, part two is going to be everything that you want to know and need to know about ACEs,
Okay.
especially as it relates to traumas with
Right.
children.
Okay.
So we're just gonna give you a Cliff Notes version of it in this particular episode.
Okay.
The mic is yours.
So tell me your question one more time.
What
So I
is
can
ACEs,
confirm
first of all?
it. Okay. ACEs is an acronym for Adverse Childhood Experiences. This was a study that was conducted between 1995 and 1997 and had over 17,000 people that participated in this survey. What I love is that it happened, and when it happened in 1998, it was a big deal. This information is still placed on the CDC website. So if you go to cdc.com, you can go and see that information. So the information isn't mine,
Okay.
it's actually the Center for Disease Control has those rights for that. They paired with Kaiser Permanente, the hospital, and came up with this study. What I love is that it's out there. What I don't love is that we're not doing anything about it. Just like COVID 19. If COVID 19 was a big deal and shut us down 2 years ago, ACEs can do the same thing. Now we're talking about monkeypox and they're talking about shutting down and doing all of this for monkeypox. We should be shut down for ACEs. So I think my issue is that we've created it as a normalcy, which it's not normal to be a victim of domestic violence, physical violence, emotional neglect, physical neglect. It's not okay. And so with ACEs, there's three different categories. You have your emotional, physical, mental abuse, you have your emotional neglect, mental neglect, and you have your household dysfunction. And over the years, they've created, some positive ACEs. They've created, some other ACEs that deals with racism and cyberbullying and things of that nature. But yet, it's just a discussion. Nobody's really doing anything about it. We just talk about it. Me, and I'm just being honest, my personal opinion, I do something about it because I'm addressing those issues when it comes up in special education. So for a young man that is 5 years old who has severe trauma, there's something going on. I don't know if it's in the household, but it comes to the school. And that's where I push information about ACEs on to our parents. Do they care? All I can do is continue to educate and let them know that it's out there and it could be addressed. But in special education, though, students can get the counseling services if needed and requested due to their trauma.
Dr. Williams, we're about to get into the meat and potatoes of your personal journey, your personal crusade.
Okay.
And this is the Trigger One to Talk podcast, streaming on all platforms, available video on Spotify and the Independent Consulting Solutions LLC website every Thursday morning. Check us out, like, subscribe, follow, comment, review, all of those things. We're going to get into a shameless plug section towards the end and let you know how you can get in touch with the wonderful Dr. Torie Williams, because it's just so many things that she is doing that is so honorable, just to say the least, in the film, in the realm of education.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Williams, I mean,
Yes.
your personal crusade is not just education, but it's these babies that are
Mm-hmm.
being labeled,
Mm-hmm.
some correctly, some
Mm-hmm.
incorrectly,
Mm-hmm.
some unfairly,
Mm-hmm.
some righteously.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about how you go about it.
Right.
I believe
Right.
everybody, and people have a problem with the term labels.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to deal with that, not right now, but
Mm-hmm.
we're going to deal with that in part two. Here's my question for you:
Okay, I'm ready.
personal crusade, personal journey.
Mm-hmm.
When you see a student, gender be damned, ethnicity be damned, religious affiliation,
Right.
economic status, all of that stuff. When you see one of these babies coming to you, and I don't mean little bitty babies, but I'm just saying, like, what ages are we talking about? The kids that you deal with, what's
I
the age range?
I am an administrator over at elementary school and a middle school, and I chose those on purpose, which I'm glad I did, because all of my experience actually has came from high school. So when I was in Chicago, I taught at a high school all these time, all those years. So you're talking about 18 to 20 years
Mhm.
in high school. And the thing with switching is when they're in the ninth and 10th grade, there's not too much you can do about it. I mean, to hear some of the stories that have happened, just like you're in the 10th grade, like nobody diagnosed you with an emotional disability. That's interesting.
Oh, we're
And
going to talk about that today.
yeah, I am actually emotionally. Um, I actually took an emotional intelligence class, and I'm actually going to give free consultations to people just to educate them on exactly what it is and how to address it because that's an issue. It's a huge issue when you have kids that are being emotionally neglected at home and then they get to school and we're feeding them and we're doing what we're doing for them. So it just really depends. Like I said, every student is special education. I don't want to pair ACEs with special education. I do not. But I want the listeners to know that there are services that we provide in special education that regular education students cannot receive unless they go through special education, like counseling services, because we offer that under the special education umbrella. Everybody doesn't qualify for it. They don't.
Dr. Williams, you're a mandated reporter. Like
Hmm.
when you see situations in students who are listed as special education
Hmm.
or special education, or you called it a special population.
Yes.
So these students that are in that special population,
Hmm.
as a mandated reporter specifically, what are you mandated to report in that population when it comes to DV, sexual traumas, or any traumas that you feel needs to be reported? Because it may be different than the stuff that I'm mandated to report. My primary mandate is child and elderly abuse issues.
Mm-mm. We have to report everything. If we know that there's something going on, we
Uh-huh.
actually have to report it.
Okay.
I mean, teachers and educators know that we are mandated reporters and we have to. But we're not just going to look at somebody and say, oh, we got to report. Of course, there has to be some type of investigation or,
Sure.
a follow up in regards to that. So the good thing is I'm sitting at the forefront as the administrator. The bad thing is I don't have as much contact with the students as I used to when I was in the classroom. So if someone was to come to me and say that, I could go and do an observation on my own, as an administrator to go and check things out. But that information would be coming from the people that are close to those students, which would be the teachers. And not to take myself out the equation, but I schedule meetings, I'm in meetings. So, unless they come into the meeting and there's some things going on, there's not anything that I can do. But yes, am I a mandated reporter? Yes. If I hear the information, am I going to follow up? Absolutely.
Is this an in home assessment that you're doing, or in your office or at the school? Or
I work with the educational diagnostician, and the educational diagnostician, whether they are there for social, for like a LSSP, a psychologist has her own evaluation. The educational diagnostician and has his own evaluation, and we even have a dyslexia evaluator that does evaluations specifically for dyslexia. So special education, if you all don't know anything about it, is very valuable. We have our own resources, we have our own evaluators. Before the decisions is made, like I stated before, we do testing, we do all of that before we make a decision in regards to special education and the services we provide. Yes.
Dr. Williams as a mandated reporter
Hmm.
for children who are in this special population,
Hmm.
I presume that you see a lot, unfortunately, but fortunately,
I think
because
I read a lot
you
more
read.
than see, because I get the reports. I get that information. That
Okay.
information comes to me. So I read it. If I know that there's a student that has those issues, I read it more than anything, and then I follow up with an observation.
Okay. When you're reading these reports as a mandated reporter, when you're seeing these things, where do you, well, one, do you see higher numbers of special population kids um, experiencing domestic violence compared to those that are not in this special population?
I will be honest with you. This is the Trigger Warning podcast.
Yes, ma'am.
Special education has nothing to do with it at all. And I'll tell you that more of my interaction when I was working at the high school that I was working at came from students that were not in special education at all.
Okay.
And the thing was, we talked about it all the time. Like, she was my favorite teacher and I never had her. Well, it was the truth. I interacted with all students regardless of their label, their disability. I actually made it a cool thing to be in special education, because in order to get to my class, which was a resource class which only had 10 students, yeah, I had to get to know my students in order to come in my class and interrupt their lesson. So that blend of general education and special education was there. It had nothing to do with the students in special education at all. The stories that I received, or the love that I gave, was with each student, regardless of what population they were in, whether it was general or special. So there's no correlation to special education. The thing is, if there is a correlation, so say for example, a student is emotionally disturbed, that's when they would be referred to special education. But there's no correlation at all between more or less
Okay.
regular education and general education. No, 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 no. They're all the same.
They're all the same.
It's all the same. Trust me. There's no correlation at all. Special education is special education based off of the need and the disability. And we have people that are out there to this day that have not been diagnosed of their disabilities, you know? So I won't make that statement at all. I will say there is not a difference at all between regular education and special education in regards to the experience that they've experienced in their childhood. No.
Do you think that parents are more afraid of their kids being labeled as special population, or do you think they're more afraid that these kids are going to not get um, the attention that they need because of whatever their special need is?
Now that's a good question. The label, hands down, has been an issue since I've been in this position. I have read paperwork where parents are, I do not want these services for my kid, and then their kid is still struggling. And it's like, well, you never gave special education a chance. I think you should give special education a chance for your student, and let's see the progress and growth of your child. So we've had a lot of people that are not educated on special education at all. Shame on them. But I do the best. That's what I also do in my position, to educate parents, to educate the students. At the middle school that I'm at, I encourage the middle schoolers to come to their meetings so they can take advantage of their accommodations and take care of their goals, and not put that negative label on special education. I've also had parents that, due to COVID, students have been out for 2 years, and by age they might be in the second grade, but they have never received any form of education outside of school. That doesn't
Uh,
make them my age a second grader if they've never went over ABCs and the basic stuff that parents should have taught their students when they were at home at COVID. That doesn't qualify them for special education either. And I've had a few run-ons and discussions, heated discussions with parents telling me I don't know what I'm talking about. But the reality is, if you think about it, parents, we sat at home for 2 years. Kids were forced into virtual learning. Did you help? Or did you just allow them to sit in front of a TV and just do nothing for 2 years? So we're also in that COVID era where kids are returning back to school and kids are struggling because they haven't had 2 years of services. And I'm talking about educational services. That doesn't necessarily mean that because you're 9, you're supposed to be in the fourth grade. No, if you didn't do 2 years of work and education, you're actually in the second grade. Has nothing to do with special education at all to me. And again, I hate to say that it's common sense, but think about it. If you didn't do anything, parents, when your kids were at home for 2 years, then your kid is actually going to be behind educationally due to COVID.
that's such a great point because with the pandemic, we
Mm-hmm.
all were affected by it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the reason that you're talking to me right now is because I retired as a COVID paramedic. You know, and when it hit uh, Missouri, the fire department that I worked for, which covered 17 of the 91 municipalities in St. Louis County, three zip codes that we covered. Those three zip codes had the highest number of COVID cases per capita in the whole state.
Mm-hmm.
So we were up to here with COVID patients. Our coworkers were getting COVID left and right. You know, it went all the way up the chain as far as our higher ups at the department. And so, you know, I retired, and I talk about this all the time because of my wife's medical issues in
Mm-hmm.
relationship to her autoimmune diseases, and she gets sick really easy. And so to not be someone who was a carrier at minimum, I decided to retire from the job, and then we relocated here, which is part of the plan. We just moved it up. The reason
Mm-hmm.
I bring it up is because when COVID hit, everybody had to do something with these kids in terms of their
Right.
education. So virtual learning became apropos. And even though there were people that homeschool, it wasn't as widespread. Like everybody was homeschooling.
Mm-hmm.
So to you, was it a situation where we know people can have the option of homeschooling? We just weren't ready for that.
Mm-mm. We weren't
What
ready.
do you say?
Teachers weren't ready, students weren't ready, parents weren't ready, which is the reason why we have a teacher shortage. It's also a reason why kids are still being homeschooled, but they're not being homeschooled enough to where they're able to come and return into a regular school setting and survive. Parents are excited that their kids are back to work, but like I said, they want to refer to special education to help when special education is that's not special education. If your kid is behind, your kid is behind. So there's Sylvan Learning Center and there's tutoring and there's all those other things that needs to happen instead of you just placing your kid in special education because that's not what special education is for.
Give us the list of don'ts. Here's the list of the reasons that you do not want your kid to be in special education from your professional perspective. What do you tell parents? Hey, I'm going to say no to your child being in this program because boom, 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 boom. What are your list of don'ts?
So that's a great question. There's no list because if, as a parent, you were to say, hey, I think my child is in special education or needs special education services, we're going to evaluate them. And when we evaluate them, the evaluation is going to determine whether they are in need of services or not. So it's not me making a final decision and saying, "Hey, you're supposed to be in special education." We have students that have this specific learning disabilities. We have students that have hearing loss. You know, so we do have it. It's not about being bad or good. We actually have students that need the services due to being severe and profound disabled or having dyslexia. You know, so there are people that really need the services and all of that comes from the evaluation. So if a parent refers their student to special education, it's our job to follow up. So I'll give you another example. Had a
Huh?
young lady, she's an educator. She knew that her son was possibly had autism, but the father wasn't all for the testing. Well, here it was years later, and he got tested, and he was tested as a student with autism. Mother immediately, shoulders popped up. She was excited because her son has been struggling a long time. So yeah, think about it. A student with autism, he's been struggling a long time. And then dad didn't want that label on his son. So dad went from because here it is, he has a son that has been officially labeled as a student with autism. So in the household, nothing's wrong with my son. I'm not saying that that happened, but it could have. Nothing's wrong with my son, and mom is saying something's wrong because he's not doing well. And to have that evaluation to basically qualify him for services was good for him. So again, there's no If a parent, if a teacher, if someone recommends their student for educational for special education services, we have to do what we need to do to test them to see. I had another family who was testing the daughter for dyslexia. So the parents said, well, test all my girls and see if they're
Wow, right.
dyslexic. And out of all four girls, there was only one that was dyslexic, and she received services through special education. So, there's the elimination of the stereotype. It's not a negative thing at all. It's actually a great thing to do. But again, if we test and your son is not intellectually disabled and they're bad, then that's where I come in and say, that's the wrong label for your child, and we need to do what we need to do to give your child the right label. There are students that have been dismissed from special education, absolutely.
Is there a thin line between bad students and special population students? You know what I
I
mean?
It's a good question. So, as a person that can handle, and I'll say can handle. So, shout out to
That's
my
why I'm asking you because I'm like, I gotta ask Dr. Williams. You're the professional.
yeah.
What's the line of demarcation?
It depends. I'll be honest. It honestly depends on the eye of the beholder. If the teacher thinks that the kid is bad and the kid is doing bad things, that kid might not be doing bad things to another person. So it really just depends. It really honestly depends. That's why it's an individualized educational program based off of the need of the student. It's individualized. We can't stereotype. Have we stereotyped? Yes, we do it all the time. We stereotype our kids. We're stereotyping our kids now, the ones that did not receive that 2 year love from COVID, and trying to place them in special education or do something different. And that's not the right thing to do. So I'll give you an example. Yes, I worked in a behavior intervention unit. I did. I loved my boys, they were great. Loved them because I wanted to eliminate that stereotype that they had on African American males. And so I had one that I still talk to. I have several. I have a lot that I still talk to, but just one in particular got him involved in extracurricular activity. I knew his past experiences. He had brothers that were, heavy in gangs, and you know, they were on the streets. But once he saw how beneficial education was to him, he did what he needed to do. He tested out of special education. I kept him in special education because of his emotional disability, but he became a quarterback. He got involved. He did what he needed to do, and he graduated. He was the first person out of his entire family to graduate as well. So there is the elimination of that stereotype. Was he emotionally able? Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. However, did he have aces? Yes. However, did he eliminate the stereotype? Yes. It was funny. We were actually on the news, and I had him and I had my valedictorian standing right by each other on national news on ABC 7, because ABC 7 came to visit us. Um, our football team, our band, everything. I wanted them to have the same recognition as Naperville knows. Naperville North, Naperville South, whichever schools that they put on TV, you're going to put this school on TV too. And we did it. I mean, he still talks about that to this day. That was like the best thing that has ever happened to him, to see that these kids got up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do this. And it was my boys. My boys were the main ones. It's funny because even now that I think about it, a lot of them graduated in 2016,
Okay.
and by request for prom, they had a special guest. And if you're in Chicago, you know of this special guest. Well, shoot, if you know anything about music and rap, everybody knows G Herbo. That was a big deal to them to have G Herbo pretty much perform at their prom. And to this day, I want to say about 2.5 weeks ago, they shouted me out on social media and was like, "Yeah, she took care of us." I did, because I wanted them to know the things that they experience on the outside doesn't necessarily mean that these are the things that they have to experience. They're great fathers. We have a lot that have actually left Chicago for better. that went and got CDL license, and we're talking about the ones that were in the behavior intervention program that I was in when I was working at that school. They're actually doing well. A lot of them are really doing well for themselves.
That's a
Yes.
blessing.
So it's eliminating the stereotype. Just because they're black men don't necessarily means that they have to have that label. They can do great things. And each and every one of them, I mean, I would even open up the school on Saturdays to give them something to do and do basketball tournaments and things of that nature. You just got to find a way to connect to the students. And I did that. I did. So shout out to my who is the current activity director at the school, Dina Owsley. She's amazing. I wouldn't have would not have been able to do it without her and a bunch of people. So I'm not going to go and shout out everybody, but you all know who you are. Yes, we did it.
We're gonna wrap up real soon because this is starting to get into the part two
Ooh,
and the
okay.
part three. So I got three. See, okay, Dr. Williams, I got to tell you like I tell everybody, Mrs. LP,
Mm-hmm,
which is our resident everything. She's
mm-hmm.
the president of the company. She's our true crime unsolved because she only likes to unsolve true crime. She's a true
Okay.
crime unsolved detective. She
Mm-hmm.
provides the information for our missing person case, which every episode we do a missing person case on
Okay.
the Tip Point Talk podcast. And 99% of those missing person cases that we cover are melanated men, women, or children. They can be
Okay.
abducted, run away, or kidnapped. If they're not missing, but they died under mysterious circumstances and the killers haven't been brought to justice or what have you, we'll cover that story.
Okay.
So one of the questions that I want to ask you. So I'm going to ask you one question, but it has 27 parts. I'm going to
Okay.
eliminate the 27 parts because Mrs. LP, it drives her insane when I
Okay.
do that. So I'm going to ask you three questions.
Okay.
The first question is we're talking about stigma, stereotypes, and taboos when it comes to ACEs,
Mm-hmm.
especially especially with melanated men.
Okay.
When you're talking to these young men and
Mm-hmm.
or their families, I
Mm-hmm.
know a lot of times we have these words that people use when it comes to special population
Mm-hmm.
slurs, uh, retarded, on the small yellow bus, wearing a helmet. You know, I can go on and on and on and on. Is that something that you hear that these young men and or their caregivers say to you as a reason that they may be like, I don't want to probably be part of that?
It depends. So for my high school students, they had already had their labels. So it wasn't that. It was more or less trying to figure out how their kids were going to get out of high school.
Yeah.
For the elementary and middle school, I've seen it. I've seen it already. I've seen a few students. I had to talk to an athlete, nice, handsome, looking young man, um, an athlete, and he was trying to get his dyslexia services removed based off of that. And I
Yeah.
just had a nice good talk with them and said, hey, I understand, but what happens if you get to the league and you have to read the teleprompter and
Read
figure
the
out what's
contracts.
going on? You actually are going to need these services, and he stayed in the program because here in the state of Texas, it's an option. It isn't anything mandatory if you wanted to be into
Okay.
the dyslexia program. And that's
Okay.
just for middle school students. So for elementary school students, they really can't advocate and speak for themselves. The parents have a lot to do with it. I think a lot of resources need to be out there for the parents. They just need to be up and ready for what they're receiving in when it comes to their children. Because I always hear a lot, oh, they don't do that with me when they with me. Of course, but why are they doing it?
Yeah. Why are they doing it? Like, yeah. Don't
They
mean it's not
doing
happening.
if they have a true disability, they're doing it in front of you. Of course, you want to say that, and that's your normal response. But then again, the kids are just now returning to school after 2 years. So, playing around and doing these type of things, whereas somebody might see that as a disability, somebody might see it differently than that.
Have your students ever said or their caregivers said that the reason that they, like the dad that didn't want to admit that his son was on the autism spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
um, have any of those parents or those children said that if you put me in this special population, I'm going to look at it as a death sentence?
No. Mm-mm.
And the reason I ask you that is because we know a lot of times when it comes to some of these things, like being labeled, as we talked about earlier, that can be a huge stress inducer to a young kid, regardless of whatever. And
Right.
so we know that suicide rates are going up with children.
Mm-hmm.
Know that they're imploding more, whether they cut, whether they are abusing drugs,
Right. Yeah.
alcohol. You know,
Yes,
they're doing more. Unfortunately, acts of sexual trauma to each other.
they are.
We could go on, and we're going to be talking about that in parts.
Mhm.
So I just want to kind of set the stage for these questions that I'm going to be asking you, because I know there has to be something, because I know as a paramedic, I've dealt with that.
Right.
When I'm doing my assessment, I responded on calls where it was like, oh, well, it was just a behavior health issue, and we show up and the kid is wilding out. Maybe
Mhm.
they're not complying with their medication. Maybe
Right.
it was expired. Maybe their parent didn't want to give the kid the meds anymore. Maybe the kid didn't want to take the meds anymore. It was all kind of stuff that we had to go in. And fortunately, where I worked, when I was at the fire department, we always had a crisis intervention trained police officer that would show up for mental health issues, just as well as if it was a domestic violence call or sexually based offenses call. So
Right.
it helped a whole lot manage that environment, that scenario, because me as the medic, my job is to be the eye in the hurricane of my patient's emergency
Right.
call. But I'm also responsible for everybody that's on that scene, including the other first responders, all the bystanders that are there, because anything can happen at any time,
Right.
good, bad, ugly, or indifferent. For you being in the school, are you kind of having that same mindset that you got to be this eye in the hurricane of this kid's emergency, because you want to make sure that you are staying on top of the potential fallout that
Hmm.
this kid may have if they are introduced as a new member of the special population? What say you?
So it's a two-part answer,
Let's go.
but it's not that. I think the thing with special education needs to be defined. And people don't know exactly what it is. And because people don't know exactly what it is, like I said, that's my reason for going back into it. I did the educational consulting. I've sat as a educational consultant for special education and advocated for special education. Like I said, that's my reason for going back. But I don't know. It's it depends. Like I said, a lot of the, and you have great questions, but a lot of it just honestly depends on the situation and the
Sure.
individual and the person. So for a student in high school, it's a different experience than a student in elementary school, because honestly, the kids in elementary school have no clue. Middle school are still learning, and they're determining and they're doing what they need to do. In high school, it's kind of like, well, it's too late. I'm about to graduate, or yeah, I'm doing this. Um, I bring up, let me give you an example.
I
Um,
love example. I'm an example king, so please just, we got the time.
I'm not going to place a stereotype on this young man
Sure.
because this is being recorded, but we had a famous young man that was a graduate of Simeon High School, that went on to Memphis, stayed his first year, and decided to go into the league, and got into the league. Some things happened, injury happened, and here we are. I honestly think that young man should have stayed in school. Was he in the special education program? I won't say that. I just know based off of everything, he should have stayed in school to receive the services that he needed to receive. And I think he probably would be in a different place than he is now, if that makes sense.
And we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Final question before we jump into the shameless plug session, which you're going to tell us how we can get in touch with you. I'll bring that stuff up on the screen that I have and
Okay.
our missing person case. So while I'm asking you this,
Okay.
if you, Dr. Torie Williams,
Me.
could write a letter or an email to little Torie at whatever age that you're a minor, if you could write a letter or an email to yourself, what would you say?
Thank you. Dear little Torie, you turned out to be an amazing young lady, despite all of the experiences that you experienced in your childhood, whether it was the breaking up with your parents, but the trials and tribulations that you experienced in life, it shaped and typified you to who you are now. Glad that you went through those experiences because it made you the person that you are now. So I love my childhood. I did. My parents actually had me involved tremendously. I don't think it was because they didn't know what to do with me. I just wanted to be involved. Anything from Girl Scouts to being an active member in the Kansas City, Missouri International Marching Cobras. I was a member of the Boys and Girls Club. I participated in Hallmark cars, writing books due to the Boys and Girls Club. So I was actually extra involved, which helped me be the woman that I am now. So I like little Torie. I think she's amazing. I have 3 little Tories right now who are amazing. So I have nothing to say, nothing but positive to say to little Torie.
That's amazing. We're going to
Mhm.
move over to our shameless plug segment. And this is where you're going to enlighten us on how people can get in touch with you, what you got coming down the pipe,
Oof.
what, or like, I don't know, do you have books? Can somebody buy your dissertation? Because I would love to read that,
Well,
just
my
whatever you got going on, the mic is yours.
well, that's interesting. I am an author. I don't talk about it as much, but I am an author. I did collaborate with other educators and came up with a book to help. I wish I can grab it, but it's
So
out
we'll
there.
talk about it.
Go
Yeah.
on Amazon.com, just look up Dr. Torie Williams. That information is out there. My dissertation, I've actually had a few referrals for my dissertation. Um, a few people have actually used it since 2019. My
Okay.
dissertation is on ProQuest. It can be published, it can be bought because it is a professional certified document. It does have
Right.
to be bought. It's not for free. And it is on proquest.com. I have some things under wraps. I'll be totally honest with you. I do. I have a few books that I am collaborating and then also working with on my own. One of my mentees actually finished his book. I was helping him so much. And we were actually helping each other. I closed my eyes because he's going to be so mad. I have not even looked at mine since the last time I looked at him and congratulated him on getting his book out. So I have to do a little bit better than that. But yes, I participating in conferences. Like I said, attending meetings and facilitating for special education actually really keeps me busy. Being a single mom, raising my 3 girls that are heavily involved in extracurricular activity, that's a lot. So you can find me everywhere. I'm on social media everywhere. Twitter as Dr. Victorious. I am on Instagram as Dr. Victorious. I actually have a group on Facebook. It's called Be Victorious with Dr. Torie Williams. I have about 1,000 people in that group. It started off with the group of family and friends, and then people started referring um, their friends and family in that group. So, as much as, yeah, yeah, it's there. And I haven't been as active as I would like to be on there, but there are people in there. It's a private group by request. All of that information can be found in my bio on social media because I have my link tree and it has that information in it. I'm extremely proud to be a member. I'm the director of educational ACEs for 16 Strong Project. And so we still have Operation In With Us. We're still working on that. A little disappointed that we can't get into schools that we need to get into, but nonetheless, that's a work in progress. I do have a website, let's be clear.
Yeah.
It's thevictorious.com, but it is heavily under construction because I'm going to be
Okay.
adding some things to that.
Sure.
Um, the last conference that I attended as a dissertation coach. So not only am I a life coach, not only am I a mentor, but I do dissertation coaching, educational consulting. I do pretty much based off of need. Um, and so I'm waiting for my website to get up there and get ready. But there's a lot. I have a podcast that's out there. Be Victorious with Dr. Torie Williams. Please subscribe on YouTube. What I love that I did, yes, I've done a lot of podcasts because everybody's interested in ACEs, so I'm excited about that. My podcast that I did, I kind of love the fact that I correlated ACEs with other things. So, like, say, for example, one of my guests was my colleague that I work with. She has lupus, and we correlated her lupus with adverse childhood experiences. So, I'm not just doing working, talking, I'm actually working, doing what I need to do to get that word out about ACEs. So, there are some great podcasts. I've participated in a few. Um, I'm on Clubhouse, not as much as I would love to be. Um, but I am on there. I do have a group, ACEs 101 on Clubhouse. I
Mhm.
said Twitter. I'm actually even on TikTok.
You on
Yes.
TikTok?
I'm
Yes.
on
Okay.
TikTok. So what's interesting is I'm on TikTok as a W mom. I will brag about it. My page is pretty popular based upon my daughters. It's a fun way for us to get out there and have some fun and show the world how much we have fun. But then I also have a page for Be Victorious. It talks about some of the things that I went through. Like, I'll give you an example. I came up with a TikTok because people still refuse to call me Dr. Torie Williams, but it was earned. And if you're asking me, well, what should I call you? You're going to call me Dr. Torie Williams. So
Wait. Yeah.
I play around with it a lot, but it's up there for entertainment purposes
That's right.
only. So I do a lot of content in different places, and I'll be honest, my content is different everywhere. If I feel like tweeting, then I'm going to tweet something, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to place that on Facebook because it's not Facebook relatable, if that makes sense. So,
Absolutely.
am I a social media person? Not as much as some. I don't have time to be on there as much as others because, like I said, I'm a single mom and I am working full time to change lives every day, but I get on there as much as possible.
Dr. Torie Williams,
Yes.
PhD.
It's
It's
act it's
it's
actually EDD.
EDD. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
EDD.
it's
Okay.
fine.
It's what's the difference?
The difference, honestly, is the level of it's it depends on the eye of the beholder. I'm staying in education, and because I'm staying in education, mine is an educational doctorate. As far as a PhD, it more has to do with the philosophy. ACES is not a philosophy, but
Okay.
it is a philosophy of education. And so, because of my topic, I chose the educational route because I want to continue to educate and become an expert in that area. It's hard to become a philosopher on ACEs when that was something that was already put out there already. So I get that question all the time. It has to do with the philosophy.
Gotcha. All right. I updated it.
Thank you.
Dr. Torie Williams, EDD.
Yes.
I presume.
Yes.
See, well, I don't understand what the problem is. It's
Yeah.
easy. You know what I mean? Like
It just depends. And like I
there's
said,
no argument.
if I wanted to become a professor, I could. If I wanted to become a professor with a PhD, I could. So honestly, it really depends on the approach that you're taking in regards to your work. Like my work is specifically for adverse childhood experiences in correlation to extracurricular activity, and how that has everything to do with school. So I can do whatever I need to do in any setting educationally. I can do it wherever. It just depends. If I'm going to do more research, that's where the PhD will come in, where I can continue to build on that.
And
It's easy as taking one or two extra classes.
I would consider you one of the foremost experts in regards to ACEs.
Yeah, that's what I wanted.
We're going to talk about that in part two real
Okay.
soon. So I'm going to go ahead and move us over into our last segment, which is our missing persons component.
Okay.
Just mute your mic. It's probably going to take me 2 or 3 minutes. I'm going to read the story because I don't have the news story, the video of it, but this is something that I got from Mrs. LP. So again, thank you all for joining the Trigger Warning Talk podcast with our special guest, Dr. Torie Williams, EDD. We're talking about domestic violence and ACEs and a bunch of other things. This is part one. We're going to have a story that's very interesting. This story goes back 60 plus years. This is the case of ADELE Marie Wells. On the screen, for those that are not watching this video, this is from the Charlie Project. So their website is charlieproject.org. The case of ADELE Marie Williams. In the photos that they provide, one picture of hers from 1958, and then they did an age progression to age 69 from 2020. So she's been missing from 11/21, which was yesterday. So 11/21/58, missing from Flint, Michigan. The classification is non-family abduction, sex female, race black, born January 1, 1951. So she'd be 71 now. 7 years old when she was missing. At the time she was missing, she was 3'6", weighing 50 pounds. Clothing and jewelry, they said that she had a gray coat, blue dress with a design of small animal figures along the lower hemline, red knee socks, and black shoes. And distinguishing characteristics are African American female, black hair, brown eyes. At the time of her disappearance, ADELE had her hair styled with waves at the sides and bangs. Here are the details of her disappearance. ADELE was last seen in Flint, Michigan on November 21st in 1958. She was a second grader at Jefferson Elementary School and had stayed home from school that morning because she had a cold. In the afternoon, she decided to go to school. She stopped at her grandmother's house just blocks from the school. On the way there, ADELE was last seen leaving her grandmother's. She never arrived at school and has never been heard from again. Police stated they had reliable reports of a young man carrying a small girl to a dirty black Chevrolet between 8 and 10 years old, which was near the creek on Lewis Street. The man is described as a light-skinned African-American wearing a gray coat and red socks. He has never been identified, and it's unclear whether he was ADELE's abductor, but other children who attended her school said the driver of a car fitting that description tried to lure them into the vehicle in the days preceding ADELE's disappearance. ADELE is part of a family of 9. Her father was a factory worker in Flint at the time of her disappearance. Her case remains unsolved to this day. If you have any information, good, bad, ugly, or indifferent, about the whereabouts of ADELE Marie Wells, even after all of this time, please contact the Flint Police Department at 810-237-8600. Again, any information about ADELE Wells, you want to contact the Flint PD at 810-237-8600. There's also some links to some sources information. So The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children have a file on her, and you can go to their website. That would be in the link that I'm going to post in this episode. Also, NAMSA, the Detroit Free Press, has printed information about her in the Ludington Daily News. All of these sites have information about this story. And again, we always do a missing person case. We don't care how old it is. We don't care whom it is. We don't care where it happened. What we care about is bringing the same energy and media coverage to the 99% of the cases that we covered that are melanated men, women, and children. I want to say in closing, thank you to Dr. Torie Williams for all her information. We're going to get ready to do part 2, and we're going to deep dive into everything related to ACEs, as well as some more information about some of these traumas. For Dr. Williams, I am your host, LP. As always,